Recorded.
Recording.
I should also, as Hillary's pulling this up, we have submitted this for CEUs to IEPA. We haven't got feedback yet, but I don't think this is right, right in their target area. So I can't say because it hasn't been approved yet, but it's likely that CEUs will be available for this. So registering for the meeting, and then we'll sort back through that. Okay, Hillary, take it away.
All right, thank you, Stephen. So you can see the presentation? Good, great.
We
okay. So yeah, I mean, first of all, thank you guys all. Thanks everybody from the DuPage River Salt Creek Work Group members that are here today, and the projects committee and the special conditions permit holders for the roles that they have played in this project to date. Like Stephen mentioned, we've been working on this project for a couple years now. So I'm going to try to synthesize and present to you what we've done in a way that's digestible, but not too in the weeds, because I could talk about this project for hours, but that's not really in the interest of everyone's time. So I'm going to be walking you through the modeling for the DuPage and Salt Rivers, Salt Creeks, and we're going to talk about the objectives, information on the modeling platform, calibration, sensitivity, and management scenarios where we actually apply the models to meet certain project objectives. Okay, so this is going to be the outline of the presentation today. First, talking about objective and scope, the history, very brief history of the modeling in the watershed, how we developed the model, how we calibrated and what the results looked like, some sensitivity testing we conducted, and then the management scenarios, which are kind of the exciting part at the end, I guess. It's all exciting. And I'm going to be focused a little bit today on the East Branch DuPage, because we don't really have the time to talk about this level of detail for all of the watersheds. But keep in mind that when we talk about the East Branch, that similar analyses were done for, and modeling were done for, all four of the main stems. So first, our objectives and our scope. So why are we here? So the special permit conditions require that permittees, work with other watershed members to determine the most cost-effective means to remove dissolved oxygen and offensive condition impairments for the DuPage River and Salt Creek watersheds. So why is that? To support aquatic life. So we're looking for opportunities to improve water quality with that end game in mind of improving aquatic life habitat conditions. Improving what that improvement can look like, especially in the context of what we're going to be doing in the modeling environment. Are there ways that we can improve fish passage with dam removal, for example? Are there ways that stream restoration can be conducted, or stream habitat conservation? Improving dissolved oxygen can look a couple of different ways. There's a lot of different ways you can kind of slice and dice what constitutes a dissolved oxygen improvement. Maybe it's increasing the average DO or increasing the minimum DO relative to some of the numeric water quality standards. It could also involve decreasing the diel, or that daily range in dissolved oxygen concentration, because when you see a huge swing in dissolved oxygen day to night, that's indicative of algal activity. And once your DOs start getting like super saturated and anoxic, that's a lot of nuisance algae, we'll call it. Nuisance algae can also mean just, visual impairment too, which I've got some slides to illustrate that. Improving algal conditions is another element of the project as well. Like, we wanted to see, is there a reduction in both floating and attached algae in these systems? And there's a couple different ways we can look at that as well. And then improving nutrient conditions as being kind of the primary vehicle for us to approach some of these ways to improve aquatic life. So is there a way, what is the way to decrease in-stream total phosphorus, and what is going to be the lowest hanging fruit to get there? So modeling. What are we doing? Why are we doing it? So we know that the real world is very complex. There are ways that we can we're developing the modeling for this watershed because we can't do these things in real life. I found a great black and white photo of an analog model, of building a tabletop stream model, which I thought was pretty exciting. And then there's also, you go from analog models, those were used more historically to develop these governing equations that are then going to be the code behind these mathematical models that we use in cases like today, what I'm talking about with Qual2KW. So we're trying to find ways to simulate the complex reality in a way that's digestible. So I was actually thinking about this in the context even of like a weather forecast. That's a model that we use every day. We check our phone, we check the weather. It tells us that there's a 75% chance of rain. That's based on meteorological models and statistical relationships and observed data and patterns and governing equations. And if it says there's a 75% chance of rain, we can use that model output to make an informed decision about whether or not to bring an umbrella. So it doesn't tell us 100% sure that it's going to rain, but it gives us enough information based on good science and known kinetics and relationships to be able to make informed decisions. So that's kind of the mental space to get into when talking about the model today, is thinking about how we can best use it to make these decisions. So models are tools in that way. And so we chose the model Qual2KW, I'll talk a little bit more about in a moment, because it's widely used for in-stream simulations of this type. And it's very robust. It's used in a lot of like TMDL scenarios for dissolved oxygen. It can simulate a 24-hour cycle, which is very helpful when you're talking about algal kinetics. And, depending on when you sample, it's going to be different concentrations during the day. So we're trying to capture that in our approach. So the modeling pathway that we're talking about today, we're starting with study question. Then what we did over the past couple of years, we gathered the data that's been collected over the years from MBI and others. We developed our model inputs, we calibrated our model, and then we had our scenarios. So spoiler alert, this is some of the conclusions that we have that we're going to be talking through today, but I wanted to kind of put them out in front of you so you know where we're headed. So can the computer models that we created reasonably capture existing conditions in the East and West Branch and Lower DuPage and in Salt Creek? Yes, we feel confident that they are reasonable simulations. Can specific targeted management scenarios improve aquatic life conditions in this stream or in these waterways? Yes, we do believe that there will be an improvement to aquatic life conditions based on the way that we're defining that. But can we solve all impairment issues with just some specific changes like phosphorus load reductions from wastewater treatment plants? No. We all wish it was that simple, but it's not that simple. And I'll get into why and algal kinetics, and we'll talk a lot about that as we get more involved into the presentation. But can we make significant headway on addressing some of these impairments in a way that makes sense in the context of the special conditions? Yes, I do think that this is extremely valuable towards that pathway, which is why you guys proposed this project to begin with. So model selection, models don't solve our problems, but they are those tools to make those informed decisions. So now to kind of step into, this was sort of like the overarching stuff. So now to step into, starting to get into some of the weeds. So the scope and status of the project to date. Map here on the left, tree diagram on the right, for the project goal being to identify these strategic opportunities to improve aquatic life conditions. Qual2K modeling, we have 4 separate models for each of the main stems, as I mentioned. There were steps that needed to be completed basically in order there of developing the model, calibrating, performing some sensitivity analyses, and I'll go into, you know, what we did and why, and then developing scenarios. And you'll see for the lower due page, it says linkage after each of those words. That's because the output, the modeling output from each of the east and west branches was used as the headwater condition for the lower due page. So there's a linkage between the way those were set up and calibrated and scenarios that were run. We like to see that connectivity. So as you look downstream, you can see what the full kind of suite of impacts would be that far downstream. So our primary goal, as Stephen mentioned, is meeting an in-stream target for total phosphorus. We'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. And the secondary goal was, you know, if we can meet that TP target in stream, what kind of improvements can we see, or do we see, are there any, relative to dissolved oxygen and algae conditions? Okay, so a little bit about history and Qual 2K. This is going to be pretty brief. But so water quality studies, bioassessments have, you know, they're completed basically every year in a rotating fashion. And this was going to be the bulk of the data that we wanted to use to build our models. There are multiple TMDLs, there are lots of wastewater treatment plants, as you all know, and Qual has been the history, that's been like the historic model that's been used for modeling the main stems of these waterways since the 80s. And what we're talking about with these, you know, names is, you know, Qual 2 was, you know, Fortran based. You've got your black screen, your white text, you know, very, some people would say user hostile. And then as you move through time, you developed, there was Qual 2E was developed, which, you know, introduced some more complexity, Qual 2K and Qual 2KW, which is what we're using for this modeling exercise today. We're actually able to simulate an entire calendar year. So that's a big change from some of the modeling that you guys have maybe seen in the past. If you've looked at, you know, TMDL reports where maybe a single day is modeled under like super critical conditions to make sure that that conditions can be met in stream. So what we're looking at today instead is a more comprehensive through time model of each of these watersheds. Anything else cool here? No, not really. Okay, so Qual 2K. We've got our study question, we've got our modeling, and our informed decision making. This is just a screenshot to kind of demystify Qual 2KW for you guys. It's an Excel-based tool. It runs Fortran or VBA code in the background that are based on those governing equations, and the inputs are put in through a series of tabs. And, you know, it's not, I wanted to bring up the IPS model that Stephen mentioned too, to kind of talk about the way that these are different. So the IPS model, data is put into it for, and, you know, correct me if I'm wrong, IPS model developers, because I know you're on the call. But the idea being that, you know, the data associated with fish, macroinvertebrate, water quality, that data goes into that model. Some advanced statistical analyses are conducted, and then what comes out of the model and the way that it's being interpreted is being able to pull out a potential target threshold. And I have a slide for Stephen to talk about and shortly, or in a little bit, about what that target is for the stream and why. But what this model is doing kind of by contrast is that we are putting in, you know, model forcing information, and then we're letting the model run. We're simulating an entire calendar year, and we're trying to duplicate existing conditions. And once we feel confident that we're duplicating those existing conditions, then we can move forward with model application scenarios that try to meet the output from IPS, for example. So this model doesn't give us results that tell us what to do, but we can use it as a tool to test our ideas of what we think we should do. Let's see. Okay, so model development. some of the key inputs for Qual2KW, we used existing models and studies to help inform Qual2KW. The existing Qual2K models and Qual2E and through the years, those historical models were helpful for us to use as a stepping stone in developing these year-long simulations. We also used DMR data from dischargers. We made some informed decisions about CSOs. We found out where those, were located. We used USGS flow records throughout these watersheds to help develop the boundary conditions, meteorological forcing inputs, dam structures, presence or absence, depending on the simulation year. And really that wealth of data from the bioassessments and the water quality data, the SONs that have been put out that log, dissolved oxygen, sub-hourly even. All of that data goes into developing the Qual2KW model. So we've got a really bulky model with all these inputs, and then we delicately pull out what's helpful to us. Am I going backwards? Yes. Sorry about that. Okay. So here's our bird's eye view. So like I said, I'm going to focus on the East Branch in the interest of time, but to give kind of this overview for those that may not be as familiar with maybe the watershed that they're not located in, the West Branch, that simulation year that we chose was 2020. And just to kind of jump around here, Salt Creek was 2016, Lower DuPage 2018, and East Branch 2019. And those model years were selected based on when the most recent extensive, intensive biological bioassessment water quality sampling years were conducted. Which led to an interesting situation for the East and West branches, how they joined together for the Lower DuPage. We had to make some assumptions about whether or not those years were representative to then be joined to be the headwaters for 2018. The years that we looked at the water quality data for the period of record for each of these waterways and for just the simulation year, and we felt confident that they were reasonably representative of existing conditions as far as when excursions are seen and dissolved oxygen, like when is it low and where. Those seem to be pretty consistent, but between the period of record and our simulation years. So we felt confident in that choice. I just have listed here also the number of publicly owned treatment works in each of those watersheds. The slash, so like for West Branch, I say 5/2. What I'm saying there is there are 5 on the main stem. There are 2 that discharge to tributaries. So on the Salt Creek, we have 8 that discharge to the main stem, 3 to tributaries. And a number of these watersheds, or a number of these main stems, have dams and weirs of some way, of some form. And some of them are historic, some are not. So, we dove into those details and we looked at existing, FEQ models and watershed models and HEC models and tried to pull out what we could to like really lean on those existing data sets and existing models to build out what we were going to create within Qual2KW. Oh, and one thing I wanted to mention too is that the headwater conditions for the Salt Creek model was the Bussy Woods Reservoir. So we were only simulating from there down, just FYI. Okay, so model development for the East Branch. First, we did our data preparation. So that's looking at all of the existing models that we could get our hands on, and then creating these segments. Oh, I realized I'm moving my mouse around and I was on the other screen. So creating these segments of the main stem to represent different hydrologic conditions. We also prepped a lot of data for calibration. So one thing that you'll find is that, we have this wealth of water quality data. Anything that was not on the main stem, we could use to help force the model, not force, forcing conditions, boundary conditions, like what is the water quality of a tributary coming in? We can base that on the water quality data that we have on our tributary. And then all of the main stem data we got to use to calibrate the model and actually show, okay, based on all these inputs we're putting in, how well are we meeting those and actually predicting what's happening in stream? So we also had inputs to the model based on so hydraulic conditions, kinetics, sediment oxygen demand, air and dew point temperature, cloud cover, solar radiation. Our boundary conditions for the most part are, tributaries and wastewater treatment plants. They're simulated with specific flow and water quality that varies based on actual data. And then we have global parameters, such as like the rate of algae growth is maybe going to be set to the same value for the entire main stem. The channel reaeration equation may be the same for the entire main stem. And so for the East Branch, we have, model year 2019, Westlake Dam, Churchill Woods Dam removed, but still a bit of an issue there. We have some weirs that don't have impoundments, and our rating curve hydraulics were based on the DuPage County FEQ model cross sections. Okay, so once the model is developed and we have all these inputs put in, the next step is to calibrate the model. And so model calibration, I just wanted to kind of speak to the idea behind it. So what you're doing is there are, depending on your experience with a given model, there are certain key parameters that can be tweaked in a way that stay within the range of literature accepted values. Or if you have good information on how something could be tweaked, like, oh, we know that in this part of Illinois, sediment oxygen demand, particularly for these waterways, tends to fall within this range. Fantastic. So we're tweaking small parameters to best fit the observed data on the main stem. And the more confidence we have in that simulation, the more confidence we can have in our scenario application. So the key stations that we looked at model calibration for the East Branch were based on some of the long-term sonde locations that had paired grab water quality samples. And those were at Churchill Lake, Butterfield Road, Maple Avenue, Whalen Lake, and at the downstream end before the confluence with the West Branch. Okay, now I'm going to throw a bunch of graphs at you. This graph, you might think, hey, that looks really great. We expect it to. This is not an actual calibration graph. What we're looking at here is the blue line is the output from the model of stream flow at reach 17 for the East Branch model. The orange dots are the observations. So the reason that it is such a good match is because we used the observed flows to help inform what the boundary conditions were. So how much flow was coming in from the wastewater treatment plants, we had that data, and then we helped fill in the gaps of what else was coming in from tributaries and from non-point, like groundwater inflow, based on a water balance from these known flow conditions. So this graphic I'm showing as, this was like a gut check for us first, is are we capturing the right amount of stream flow and when? Are we capturing that flashiness how we expect to? Great. So we have this sort of like gut check moment wherever there's a USGS flow gauge. So this is just kind of for perspective. And then the next step was, and the point with calibration too, is first you want to make sure your hydraulics are well simulated, then you can start moving into water quality. You want to make sure that you're capturing the physical before you go into the chemical and the biological. So Next up, looking at some two calibration plots for depth on the left and velocity on the right. And also I want to apologize, the color of these graphics, this is the raw output from Qual2KW comes in this exotic teal, which is not necessarily what I would have chosen, but that's what we're working with. So apologize if it's hard to read for anybody. But so we see here that the depth simulation, depth is going to vary with flow. It's going to vary through space and time. So we're looking at a calendar year result here of simulated depth in blue compared to the orange dots, which were observed depth at various times throughout the year at that USGS gauge, based on the field monitoring. And, this profile is going to look different for any reach you look at across your model, as long as the hydraulics are different. But because we can use this as a way to make sure that our depths make sense, fall within that range, we feel confident in our simulation of depth. Similarly with velocity, which plays a big role in dissolved oxygen and reaeration, we want to make sure that we have a reasonable simulation of the velocity at these locations as well. Next up, looking at our calibration of water temperature. Water temperature is very important for dissolved oxygen considerations and for algae, because depending on the temperature of the water, you're going to get more critical conditions. Part of the reason you'll notice here that the majority of the sampling at this location in orange is occurring in the warmest part of the year, because we know that that's a critical time. That's when we want to get out there and make sure that we know what's going on. And there are so many observations you can almost not see that it's a good fit. And then we also have some points through time here, tiny little orange dots where there are more observations. There are other main stem sondes and some of the other watersheds where there's temperature data for the entire calendar year, but this is just one site that I'm showing you guys for perspective. And part of the reason that we can get such a good fit on water temperature is because we're basing the inputs of the air temperature and solar radiation and dew point temperature of the model on gridded meteorological data that is, hourly. So that's why we get to see such a good fit there. Okay, and then after looking at water temperature, we can start looking at nutrients. Now, what we're looking at here on the left is different species of nitrogen, and on the right is total phosphorus. So blue lines, again, are model output, the simulation of these parameters of, this is nitrate and nitrogen relative to observations. We're seeing the correct kind of trends here. We're missing this one little dot down here. I'll talk a little bit about what it means to miss an observation, what that, the relevance of that. And then for total phosphorus, we see that we're also kind of capturing that same trend. And then, these simulations too, relative to the sondes, the volume of data does matter. It is more helpful when you have more data. So just keeping that in mind. So like here with hourly data or, sub-daily data, at least we get to see some more of these clear trends. It's slightly harder to match grab sample data because they can be so affected by time of day that they are taken. Did it just rain? There's so many things that can go into the impacts of capturing a single grab in a bottle in time versus having a sonde out there. And even having a sonde out there, not only can sondes not tell you every water quality constituent, they also only tell you a space and time in your entire waterway. So there could be things happening to the right and left. Complex world, we're trying to capture it. So we feel confident though in our nutrient calibration. And again, this is one reach, one model. We've got graphics like this that you could explore for hours, but I'll spare you. So once we feel confident in our simulation of nutrients, then we start looking at both algae and dissolved oxygen kind of simultaneously. And that's because the kinetics behind them both are paired. If you were to tweak, the growth of phytoplankton, the rate of phytoplankton growth in the model, then you're going to see a big impact in dissolved oxygen and algae. So those are kind of handled side by side. And so the next graph is about observed chlorophyll A concentrations. But for the East Branch dissolved oxygen, so I'm showing 3 graphics here. This is 3 different locations, reach 13, reach 20, reach 18. The black line here is the dissolved oxygen saturation. So we see, we would expect higher saturation in the wintertime. That's why we see this curve the way it is, because we have cold water, it can hold more oxygen. And that's why that saturation point is high. In the summer, we see a lower saturation relative to that point because it's hotter. Our simulation is showing whenever DO goes above that saturation point, that's super saturation, which is indicative of algal growth. And then we can see here that like when grab samples were taken or field observations, single points in time of dissolved oxygen, those are these points here. But when we have a sonde out there, we can see what that diel range is actually like over the course of the day and how it varies over the summer. And so what we see here is for all of these sites is this simulation of supersaturation. We are reasonably capturing the dissolved oxygen range, particularly in that summer period where we have data. And we see, that the range is much smaller in our simulation of DO in the colder months because there is less algal activity. I wanted to point
Hillary,
out,
if could I jump in for just a second, just for people who are not looking at DO graphics every day, all year long, as you're pointing out, that we can, the black line then represents 100% saturation as the model predicts it based on water temperature. But the blue line is the observed DO from the DO sondes, and it's showing
orange.
The orange rather. And then the blue is the modeling of that. And as we can see that often we're looking at, it looks like maybe 150, 200% saturation, which is possible, of course, in water, but that is a sign of, we would classify it as excessive chlorophyll A. So we're getting respiration in the streams and we're getting this DO plunge. So a high DO, a very high DO in this particular condition is not necessarily a good thing from a water chemistry point of view.
Yes, yes. And one thing I wanted to point out for reach 18 with this simulation, what we're looking at here is our simulation in blue is capturing the majority of these points in time and part of the sonde data, but then we see that there's a drop off in that sonde and it is recording dissolved oxygens that are anoxic in this location that we are not capturing. And part of the reason that the model is not capturing that sort of anomalous blip, if you will, is because the model is only as good as the inputs we put in. So if there was, for example, a large storm event or something that came through and flushed, sediment, if there was some sort of like sensor fouling that caused an error in the sensor, if algae had somehow gotten on the sensor and then washed off, if there was, not necessarily the case in East Branch, although there are some, if there was a CSO outfall event with, water quality associated with it that we don't know, that's sort of represented in the model output as well. So inputs in, outputs out. We don't know what caused this blip. And if we did, it would have been a model input to help predict that. So does that matter that we couldn't capture that? I mean, I wish we could, but in the long run, what we're trying to do is represent the general and overarching conditions for these waterways, because we want to improve dissolved oxygen generally. We want to improve phosphorus conditions generally, and not only at the worst location at the worst time. That's sort of how this project kind of diverges from like a traditional like TMDL model run, if you guys are familiar with those. So there are cases where we are not capturing some of these blips, but luckily we also know that, and I promise I keep teasing this slide where Stephen's going to talk about the TP threshold, but we also know that when dissolved oxygen, goes to anoxic briefly, it's less critical to certain aquatic life than sustained long periods of low dissolved oxygen. So that's another reason why not being able to capture some of these lower areas is not necessarily critical towards being able to accomplish our goals here. Okay, so chlorophyll A concentrations. So like I said, this was looked at simultaneously with dissolved oxygen, and we were able to get a reasonably accurate simulation of those chlorophyll A concentrations at the couple different locations where there was data. There was not benthic algae data to use for calibration on the East Branch this year. Those they work hand in hand in the model to create the cycles in DO that you find, but we were able to use a model where we had information, I think it was the West Branch, to kind of help us estimate and assume what we thought the benthic algae component is of that dissolved oxygen kind of equation for the model. Okay, model sensitivity. This is helpful to look at, but warning, crazy to look at. So this is a tornado diagram, and you don't have to know exactly how to read it. But what I wanted to zoom in on here is the items at the top of the graphic represent parameters that the model was most sensitive to when looking at what we could change to influence minimum dissolved oxygen concentration. So model output for minimum dissolved oxygen, what seems to have the biggest impact on changing that? So as an example, if we changed what we see here at the top, the boundary condition dissolved oxygen by 20%. So every tributary that's coming in, if its dissolved oxygen is increased or decreased by 25%, that has the largest relative impact change on the minimum DO. That makes sense. High DO in stream, that makes sense. And the way this sensitivity kind of output looks is going to vary depending on where you are in the system. It's also going to depend on the time of year you look at as to which parameters the models are most sensitive to. But for the most part, the model was most sensitive to conditions of boundary dissolved oxygen, sediment oxygen demand in the sediment, algal kinetics, and specifically here, bottom algae percent coverage. And in general, most of the main stems were least sensitive to changes in phosphorus and nutrient conditions. So what does that mean? What that means is that when we changed the outputs from the wastewater treatment plants, for example, by 25% of their existing total phosphorus concentration, we saw not much impact on minimum dissolved oxygen. However, as we're going to show you in some of our scenario results, we're actually going to be changing some of these phosphorus concentrations by far more than 25%. So this gives us relative understanding of these different sensitivities of inputs and outputs here. And it helps us kind of shape our understanding of the system. and understanding how the model is being responsive. But it's just important to keep that in mind about phosphorus and its potential lack of impact on minimum dissolved oxygen as we move forward with the slide. I feel like this graphic is maybe the craziest one I've got, so don't worry if you don't understand. But hopefully I helped. Okay, so now we get into the more exciting stuff, I think. So going into our management scenarios. So what are, potentially low-hanging fruit for improving aquatic conditions? How can we get there? We feel confident in the way our models were developed. They are calibrated to in-stream data. Things are looking good. Now we have our analog of our computer analog of the real world to then run some scenarios. So, and some of these are going to be based on known and existing projects like dam removals, like our Salt Creek model, was run for 2016. We're going to run a dam removal scenario on there, see how that impacts things of that nature. So all of that is going to go into scenarios. So, Stephen, your slide is coming up next.
Okay.
I promised I'd get
Thanks for the heads up.
So to develop scenarios, it gives us a little bit more context. So these graphics, the top graphic here is showing us total phosphorus concentrations in stream across the East Branch for, the period of 2007 to 2014, and Stephen made this graphic, sites that were sampled downstream of an existing wastewater treatment plant versus upstream of any wastewater treatment plant influence. These are the concentrations and ranges thereof, and statistics of those in stream, both upstream and downstream of those discharges. So what we see is that on average, TP concentrations in the East Branch downstream of plants is over 1. Generally speaking, our data is all below 1 if you're not impacted by a discharge. So we know from the observed data alone, this isn't modeling of any kind, or it's a statistical representation though. But what we see is that we know from our observed data, the wealth of data there, that the dischargers are having a big impact on phosphorus, which is to be expected. And looking here at these percentage pie charts, I have charts like this for each watershed, and they're all very similar to each other, that we see of the flow in stream that point sources, our wastewater treatment plants, account for maybe a quarter of the flow volume in stream, but they account for 3/4 of the total phosphorus loading in stream. So we know that our lowest hanging fruit for addressing total phosphorus in stream, which is like, the nutrients that get algae very excited, is going to be, the low hanging fruit is going to be looking at opportunities to decrease phosphorus coming from these large sources, which are our wastewater treatment plants. Okay, so now I'm going to toss it to Stephen for this slide to talk about the total phosphorus threshold that ended up sort of being the target for the scenarios.
Thanks, Hillary. So we have a model now that is doing a good job predicting in-stream chemistry from the perspective of nutrients, dissolved oxygen, and algae. So one of the things we need to do if we're developing scenarios here is for controlling phosphorus is what is the phosphorus goal that we are aiming at. The state of Illinois does not have a phosphorus standard for rivers. There was an effort in the last 5 years to develop one, which you've heard us refer to this Nutrient Science Advisory Committee, which was only partially successful. And it is a complex relationship that we're looking at there, where we're trying to relate total phosphorus to aquatic life. So we took a bit of an unusual step here in that we often you'll use like the calibrated model and you'll keep ramping down on the parameters. Going back to Hillary's tornado plot, that was the plot that she was pointing out was difficult to read, but it was looking at the sensitivity of the model. And you'll keep on, pulling up on those variables where you see a positive impact on dissolved oxygen until you hit your goal. However, the relationship between total phosphorus and dissolved oxygen is it is a complicated one. And as you saw, the sensitivity model itself was not predicting a big impact from at least reducing phosphorus by 25%, was not producing a big impact on dissolved oxygen. Nonetheless, the phosphorus is a pollutant that is under the spotlight, and it is one that, as you know, we back in 2015, we were to put in controls for, we negotiated a watershed plan approach instead. However, at some point in the future, all of our treatment plants are going to move into phosphorus control, and we want to make sure that those efforts work towards hitting this aquatic life goal. So fortunately, parallel to these efforts, we were working on developing thresholds for aquatic life in our rivers from various pollutants. And so these graphics come out of our integrated prioritization system, which we've had presentations on the past. And the latest iteration of that model did in fact establish a relationship between phosphorus and aquatic life. And so this is this model is based off summer conditions. It looks at, uses paired data, that is water chemistry data, and fish and insect IBIs, and it runs a number of statistical methodologies to look at the relationships between those, including developing sensitive species, which species show the most sensitivity to phosphorus, and then we look at lots of iterations where phosphorus and lots of other pollutants are weighed and weighted and compared to those both general use fish and insect IBIs as well as these sensitive species IBIs. And what we found was that the sites that were meeting the general use IBI, so there's various categories here, but that means gets us into compliance with state law for our waterways for aquatic life attainment. That 75% of the sites that were meeting that had concentrations between 0.1 and 0.28. Now, I want to specify that does not mean that lower phosphorus does not get even better results. It does, but that is what allows, we can observe in our data set. If you remember with the IPS, we had over 400 sites that we looked at, that in that data set, those sites that had were meeting the general use for aquatic life had that phosphorus concentration. So we took that concentration and we handed it over to Hillary's team to then plug into the model and work out how we could, what steps we could take to actually reach that in-stream concentration. So Hillary, I think that covers my part. I should specify again that this data was gathered in the summer. So what Hillary is going to be showing us also refers to summer months. We're going to have to look at what's going on in the winter, but we're basing this around a summer condition. That's when the algae and DO issues typically happen. It's also when the most important time of the year for aquatic life. So there's a lot of good thinking about that, but we don't necessarily want to extrapolate to the winter condition that the same concentration would be necessary for it. We've no reason to suspect that it would, and it's outside of what we've modeled to date.
Thank you, Stephen. Yeah, so we have reason to believe that if we can get our total phosphorus concentrations in stream to be less than 0.28 milligrams per liter, that we should see a healthy kind of response in those nutrient sensitive fish species and macroinvertebrates. So that's why we have this approach. And going into this next slide, this is just speaking a little bit about algal communities in general. So the way that that threshold was set, like we said, is 75th percentile for phosphorus sensitive species. That's what we're working with. However, it should be noted that there are places like the EPA ORD is currently updating this report, but they made some calculations and statistical relationships using macroinvertebrate relationships across the country and different ecoregions, and they found when it comes to shifting algal biomass response, that you might be looking at dissolved oxygen, you might be looking at total phosphorus concentrations that are far lower than what we're talking about, which is, part of the interesting dance of this project is, we want to protect the aquatic species. Theoretically, the dissolved oxygen numeric standard is intended to be protective of these aquatic species, but there is likely an argument to be made that by meeting this phosphorus threshold, that is maybe a different way to approach what is actually protective of aquatic species, at least in a way that is appears to be attainable for these waterways. So this graph I'm showing kind of for perspective, and again, focusing on East Branch, but I will have scenario output graphs for each of the other models. The black line here we're seeing is the average concentration during those summer months of total phosphorus along the main stem. We see obviously spikes, as each of the main plants come in, and that's as to be expected. And so looking at the change of what we're trying to hit is this red line, this 0.28 is the goal. And that was the primary focus of the modeling scenarios, and with the secondary impact of, okay, once we meet that total phosphorus goal, do we also see improvements in dissolved oxygen and algae? It would be helpful if we do, but either way, can we hit that total phosphorus goal? And then these two other decreases here showing of what those other concentrations mentioned by EPA ORD, changes in algal biomass, may not happen unless there was even a far lower reduction, but that's not, what we're looking at today. Okay, so for perspective, we're going to be comparing, we're going to be looking at output, or wait, sorry, let me back up. So this is kind of related to the way we're going to be summarizing dissolved oxygen results is relative to some of these numeric criterias. You'll notice for Lower DuPage, part of the Lower DuPage is an enhanced water, so it's got a slightly different August to February standard, but the same March to July for instantaneous dissolved oxygen. That's what we're focusing on. In our report that we're writing associated with this, we go into much more kind of nitty-gritty detail about, exceedance, like the frequency and duration of exceedances, which is an interesting conversation, but not part of today. But basically, just wanted to highlight that we can use our observed data to help us understand where and when dissolved oxygen problems are happening. And that'll come into play as we start talking about other potential scenarios that could be run. So as I mentioned, some of the first scenarios that we wanted to run were dam removals. So those are, for the most part, the main two that we ran were the Hamel Woods dam removal for the Lower DuPage and the Fullersburg dam removal for Salt Creek. And then I wanted to mention that, we are aware of like the street sweeping efforts and the tabulations that are going on with that sort of non-point source TP removal feasibility analysis. However, like when you think about how much of the total phosphorus is coming from the plants, that's part of the reason why that is the big focus here. And we haven't run any scenarios that look at non-point sources because of that kind of scale of impact. Okay, so this is kind of the suite of scenarios that we ran on our calibrated models to kind of explore what the in-stream responses may be. So we had dam removal scenarios. We started with our calibrated model of that baseline year for each watershed. or for each, main stem. We ran dam removal scenarios, which then became the baseline model for all of the rest of the model runs for salt and lower. And then we ran we have a primary scenario where we have reduced total phosphorus effluent discharge to 0.35 milligrams per liter for the wastewater treatment plants. And I mean, this kind of speaks again to like how fun modeling can be, because we then also could run this scenario 3 where we just turn off the dischargers for a calendar year, see what happens, see what the model response is, just for reference. We're not suggesting that that should happen or could happen, but it's so nice to see in the modeling environment, like what kind of is the relative baseline if there were no, wastewater treatment dischargers at all, what would happen? Although, obviously in such a built environment, totally unreasonable. And then we also ran a scenario where the wastewater dischargers kept their existing flow that were observed from that model year, but we removed all nitrogen, phosphorus, and CBOD from that effluent. So those were all set to 0, just to see how much the flow volume impacts the stream without some of those more like oxygen demanding substances. And so when we talk about this discharge limit of 0.3, that is a 90% load reduction of existing phosphorus loading to these waterways. So that's significant. For perspective, we also tested a slightly lower concentration of 0.22. We also looked at a concentration of 0.5 for total phosphorus coming from these plants, because I mean, we well understand, although like economic considerations were not part of this like model output, we understand the differences between those concentrations can be, astronomical. So we're trying to be, conscious of that when working with Dina and Stephen in developing these scenarios. So the 0.35, where that comes from is the assumption that there would be a 20% margin of safety that the plants would work under, meaning that the actual discharge coming out of the plant is probably going to be 0.28. So that's sort of like the context of how these scenarios were run. Okay, and then so the next suite of plots are all going to look kind of like this. So this one is just to kind of get you up to speed. It looks like one that I showed you before as well. So we've got our average total phosphorus in stream. Our baseline is going to be the black line, and then we've got the target of 0.28, what's going to get us down there. And then the numbers here in green are the discharge maximum, or the design average flow in MGD for each of these plants. And just for clarification, the exact location of where a triangle falls, of where that point source is relative to the in-stream response, is partly just a relic kind of where it falls on that model reach. What we're looking at in this graphic is the output from the downstream model reach. So if you see it closer or further, a spike relative to a plant, it's probably just an artifact of where that model reach endpoint is. So try not to get caught up in that. And so, okay, so this is the context, and now we're going to start looking at results. And again, we are looking at March to July, which is the more conservative dissolved oxygen period as well. Okay, so for the East Branch, the mean total phosphorus in stream for each of the 3 scenarios, or 4 scenarios that we did for the East Branch, you can see here, almost all of them do meet that target in stream. We see in this area between Glenmard and Downers Grove, we see that when the limit was set to 0.5, For that scenario, it is not quite met in that location. However, the average is met for this sort of like primary scenario that we're interested in, that light blue line, which I believe it's going to be the light blue line for all of these graphics, where the total phosphorus in stream remains below 0.28 when the dischargers are maximum allowed effluents set to 0.28. And again, these are not, the plants are not simulated as discharging at their full design average flow. They are set to simulate, the average discharge conditions from DMR data for the model year. So again, we're not looking at the most critical, the hottest period, whatever. We're looking at, real data, more average type conditions. So when looking at maximum total phosphorus, we see that the in-stream target is not met in every location for the East Branch, but part of the reason for that is because there is such high total phosphorus associated with the Churchill Lake area. And I've got a picture and a couple of slides of, the aerial imagery shows, that the side bits of the Churchill Lake area are, bright green. And so a lot of that's going to be algae, that's going to be phosphorus that's associated with that. And, because of that undersized culvert, I believe it is. But so it's more of a non-point that we see this spike here. I guess that's not even really a spike, a hump. But again, we're not necessarily comparing apples to apples. I just wanted to be comprehensive in what I was showing. This graphic is more representative of what we're trying to show of meeting these TP concentrations generally. Okay, so this graphic now shows the relative impact of that same suite of scenarios on minimum dissolved oxygen during that period. So looking back, we can see obviously huge change in phosphorus concentration as expected by this 90% load reduction from our plants. Not a hugely significant improvement of on minimum dissolved oxygen concentration, but there is some improvement. And part of that comes from the algal relationships. We're not necessarily, although we may see an improvement to aquatic life, we may not see a change in algal biomass at these concentrations that we're simulating, but there is an improvement here. And I'm going to step through, I'm not going to spend a ton of time on all of the watershed results because I know now I've been talking for an hour, but I will step through all of them, and we'll give you the slides later too, so we can all kind of spend some time on them. They're very helpful to spend time on. This slide though, I wanted to show in tandem with the dissolved oxygen results. So why do we see this minimum, this dip here that like no scenario, it's impervious to all scenarios? Well, it's because we're seeing average gross respiration from algae. So this is sort of an algae respiration kind of proxy for looking at the algae results. We see very high respiration in the vicinity of Churchill Lake. So if there was an improvement to that area to kind of restore the channel geometry and kind of, that would impact the algal concentrations that are possible, which would also impact the dissolved oxygen that is coming out of, those algal kinetics. So again, we don't, oh yeah, sorry, Stephen.
Yeah, Hillary, we had a question. So, and we could probably to the total phosphorus graph or the mean, say the mean, yeah, there. So yeah, the question was, and I understand how the culvert at Churchill can cause a DO drop because of the impoundment algae, etc. But how does it contribute to increased phosphorus? But looking at it here, we can see that the phosphorus is not actually higher in Churchill Woods. It's the it's the physical conditions there that allow phosphorus to express itself more. It's not that the phosphorus concentration itself is worse. Indeed, as the model shows here, it's actually a little bit better, probably because of assimilation at this point.
Yeah, and one thing that's happening there too is that there is Illinois EPA water quality sampling data from the further edges, like not along the main stem. So we used those concentrations to help inform what we thought the non-point source contribution to the main stem would be, because we can't necessarily simulate in Qual2KW like a branching system, a complex kind of the flow patterns in that area are, you know, hydrologically complex to say the least. And so we do have some higher phosphorus coming in from those like side areas based on that data.
And in fact, on that point, let's skip to the next slide with the TP maxes, because maybe that's the slide that she was referring to, given that we see that rise in the downstream area of Churchill, but I don't believe it's actually Churchill itself.
Sorry, I just had a toddler break in.
That's all right.
It's nap time, so he's mad. Okay, so yeah, hopefully that answers that question.
Yeah, could we look at the total or the max TP graphic?
Yes.
For a second? Yeah, so it may have been, you know, looking at this, it kind of looks like there's higher phosphorus downstream of Churchill. Well, it's again not at Churchill Woods, but as we discussed, that's actually coming from the non-point source tributary inputs to the south of the, I think it's not Churchill Woods itself.
Yeah.
In fact, Churchill Woods is pretty illustrative here that, you know, it actually shows up with concentrations are actually a little lower than our general condition, but it also shows the worst algal condition, which goes to point that TP is not the only or even the main factor in driving that.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Okay. So this graphic, I created a map like this for each of the watersheds. And what we're looking at here is not even so much model results of, it's mostly, I mean, what it is the observed water quality along that main stem of the East Branch. And it's the period of record though. So it's not like just the model year. There have been improvements in some of these areas over time. That's not necessarily going to be reflected in this graphic. I mostly put this together though, because I wanted to point out that there are areas that could be approached for like targeted projects based on known low water quality concentrations, low dissolved oxygen concentrations. And it was, so I thought, okay, well, it'll be helpful if I pull some aerials, and you can really see, which I'm sure a lot of you know, this bright green algae can be present. And this is what I was talking about with Churchill Lake, like the main stem is being impacted by what's happening and water quality data we have off to the side here in these less aerated pools. And so I was just pointing out some areas just to keep in mind that we know. Here's one where the East Branch flows alongside this golf course that has some green water bodies associated with it. That, there are even, aerial imagery surveys that could be conducted to help identify target locations for specific like restoration practices, things like that. This is sort of like whether or not that excursion that we know tends to occur in this one location, if it wasn't observed in our model year, that doesn't mean that we can't approach it for a project and be part of a scenario even. Okay, so now I'm going to move on to the West Branch. And I'm just going to these graphics should be familiar because we just saw them. Hopefully it'll help kind of with the interpretation of them as we see even more of them as well. But I'm going to move through them relatively quickly. So total phosphorus concentrations on the West Branch. ignoring not ignoring, but what's happening upstream of MWRD is there's very little flow in the stream. There's not a ton of data. It's ephemeral from time to time. So what we're looking at for the most part along the West Branch is what's happening downstream of MWRD. And we see, in-stream TP concentrations on average during this period, they can be over 1, and then they decrease as you're moving downstream due to the dilution of flow being added. So the phosphorus load is still quite high, but the concentration is being diluted by the amount of flow in the stream. And even if it's low down here, it's still a problem that it's high up here relative to protecting those aquatic species. So our main scenario, again, of decreasing the discharging of phosphorus to 0.35, we see that we are able to meet that average in-stream target for that entire period. This graphic, all of the lines basically overlap each other in a way that's difficult to see, but the maximum concentration for total phosphorus we see is also below that line. And again, that's because the wastewater plants account for so much of the flow that when you dictate what that maximum concentration can be, you're basically, going to see that reflected in the output, unless there was a non-point source that we knew was contributing. So this, again, looks like what we would expect from maximum phosphorus. Dissolved oxygen, so minimum dissolved oxygen, absolute minimum, is again upstream of MWRD because it's going ephemeral certain times. That's less of an area to focus on. We're more interested in what's happening when we have actual significant stream flow. And what we see is that they're black to blue, very small input, very, very small improvement in minimum dissolved oxygen in our huge reduction in total phosphorus. However, it is kind of interesting just to show as these bookends. I know I haven't really been focused on these and talking about these graphics, but this orange line is representative of the wastewater treatment plants being completely shut off in the West Branch. And we see, minimum dissolved oxygen's quite low. So someone could look at this graphic and say, oh, wow, wastewater treatment plants are improving dissolved oxygen in the stream. Yes, they can provide a resource because of the flow that they're providing. But, everything's a double-edged sword though, because we've, built the environment so much, there's not as much base flow. So we need that flow. So, it's important that we put that water back in the stream. It, becomes even better as we improve the water quality of that treatment, as we all know, and it gets more and more expensive. But yeah, so this graphic shows that relatively small increase in minimum dissolved oxygen, and that is paired here with the algal concentration or respiration that we're seeing. So we see a slight decrease from black to blue in algal respiration due to that change in total phosphorus. And for the West Branch, I also wanted to point out some of those areas that I've colored here as red that had some of the highest percentage of observations that were low dissolved oxygen, that were excursions or exceedances of the numeric standard. Some of those areas, adjacent to golf courses, there are certain things that pop up that maybe you wouldn't expect to see low dissolved oxygen. But here's a good example of, I think this small tributary near McDowell Grove is like a branch off of the main stem. Perhaps something is happening there that we don't know about. Unknown. Let's maybe sample that area, see what's going on. Arlington Drive, you can see from the aerial imagery that water is green. So yeah, just remembering here that because Qual2KW cannot model actual fish, that's part of the reason that we're seeing, yes, maybe we're not impacting the algal respiration in the way that we wish, that this could be kind of a fix-all solution, but we do anticipate it being very beneficial to those phosphorus sensitive and non-sensitive fish species of both fish and macroinvertebrates. Okay, then lower DuPage. So we took the output from the east and west branches, we fed that in as the headwater condition for the lower DuPage. And what we see here is this black line is our simulated total phosphorus concentration in stream along from the confluence down to the dam. And the dashed line that we see over top of it, it's kind of hard to see that gray dashed line that just basically aligns perfectly with the black line, is the dam removal scenario. So as expected, we don't anticipate there to be a change in total phosphorus because we removed a dam, but we do anticipate that causing positive impacts for fish passage by removing Hamel woods, and potentially also other changes to algae and dissolved oxygen. So our scenario in blue here is representative of all of these plants set to 0.35, as well as the cumulative impact of the upstream sites as well, also being set to 0.35. So we see we're a bit lower down here than the target with a bit more of a margin of safety. Maximum TP concentration we also see is lower there than the threshold target we're talking. Minimum dissolved oxygen is quite insensitive to a lot of these changes. A lot of those lines do fully overlap. One thing that I wanted to point out here is just that the black line is the baseline, and then when the dam was removed, you see a decrease in the minimum dissolved oxygen. Does that mean that the dam removal is bad? No, it is serving its purpose in a myriad of other ways, but the slight fall of water over that dam, that reaeration boost that was happening in that specific location is no longer happening. That's fine. Just to keep that in mind, that's why you see that difference there. And here is the change in algal respiration for the various scenarios. We do see a small decrease in algal respiration, but you can see I had to change the y-axis here to really kind of see more of that change. What we see here, this is an artifact in the baseline scenario of water going over the dam. Leading up to the dam, there being, a bit more stagnant water, more algal respiration in that vicinity. As you go over the dam and it's very aerated and you're passing over the dam itself, there's a decrease in respiration that then rebounds as you move downstream. So that's why you see this crazy respiration pattern in the scenario before the dam is removed, that is then leveled out in all of the future scenarios. And then lower DuPage, some of the locations that had some of the most frequent recordings of dissolved oxygen excursions, just pointing those out here. Some of those, maybe it's just helpful to see where those are. If even if it's outside of the scope of this project of thinking about those targeted areas for potential improvement, if it's something physical that could be done to the channel. Okay, Salt Creek. Here we have, this is going to be very similar to what we saw in the West Branch with the dam removal. So even though Fullersburg Dam is removed in between the black and the gray here, no change in total phosphorus, that's fine. expected. But our scenario of the massive decrease in total phosphorus does result in meeting that in-stream target to be protective of aquatic life species as predicted by the IPS. I didn't mention this before, but you probably picked up where plants are located on tributaries. I've included their name in red below that tributary just for context. Maximum total phosphorus along Salt Creek also stays just below the target basically everywhere. Dissolved oxygen. So minimum dissolved oxygen in Salt Creek is, below the standard, instantaneously. In many locations, we know this from the observed data, and we can see that there is, it's a messy graphic. And part of that comes from the fact of like when the dam is removed, you're going to see some improvement in, well, maybe this is even better showing with the algae. With respiration, what you'll find is that when a dam is removed, you may have more velocity going through that area. You may have, a decrease in sediment oxygen demand as sediments flushed out. You may see a decrease in floating algae, but then an increase in benthic algae now that they have access to the sunlight that was previously blocked by the floating algae. So the algae relationship is complex in these waterways, which is part of the reason why we are modeling at all, because if there was a fix-all, then we wouldn't have to be here. But so as we've seen with the other models, there is not necessarily a big response in decreasing, and there is not necessarily a huge improvement in dissolved oxygen, but there is a small improvement. Low DO areas, just to point out, along Salt Creek, and we know this from the observation data. Fullersburg area, of course, the Salt Creek Country Club, things like that. Okay, last slide. So in summary, we had our study question, we did our modeling. Now we're hoping, to help that this can be used as a tool for informed decision-making. The work group supported this modeling for continuous simulations of typical calendar years. We built models and calibrated them to the wealth of data available to us. And we found, as you saw, that strategic reductions in total phosphorus from our wastewater treatment plants can meet in-stream targets based on thresholds for phosphorus sensitive fish species that are dramatic reductions that we anticipate to be protective of aquatic life. But those reductions in phosphorus, they cannot solve all algae and DO problems in these waterways, but it is a primary integral kind of first step in that direction. So some of our next steps on my end personally here are to, finalize some of our management scenarios and then potentially add some extra, or, whether or not those are a different, we can continue to work on these scenarios as we move forward. Are there places where we want to consider physical improvement to the channel or hydromodification? Are there considerations for, discharge to vary seasonally? Are there places where it seems like strategic stream shading may provide lower temperatures? Are there targeted tributary improvements? But for the purpose of this project, the main next steps are, we're working on finalizing our model development reports and our final scenario report, where we really get into even more weeds than I got into today. But with that, I'm going to stop talking and open it for any sort of questions that people would like answered. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Hillary. I certainly feel a lot smarter after that. So yeah, we're opening up to questions. I know we dealt with a few questions along the way, but please, if you have any questions, put them in the Q&A, and we'll have Hillary answer them.
Stephen, there is.
I see. Yep, go on.
Okay. I was gonna say, did you see Ed's question?
I didn't.
So,
Okay. Oh, I see. Oh, yes. Good. It was in the Q&A rather than the chat. Yeah. So Ed Rankin was asking, what is the influence of phosphorus on SOD? And oh, well, yeah, I was about to say I'll answer that, but I realized that actually the question's a little reverse because it's not what I actually expected. So is there a relationship between phosphorus and SOD?
So because we have SOD data that we were able to use to help inform the model, SOD is simulated as a input to the model. So do we expect over time, so let me back up. Sediment oxygen demand is going to be higher in areas that are downstream of wastewater treatment plants, generally speaking, because organic matter, piles up, settles down, maybe behind dams, it's going to settle. And then that, as things break down in the sediment, they're going to be absorbing and using up oxygen from the water column. And so what happens is, like, if a dam is removed, if that phosphorus source is cut back, you are going to see a change probably in sediment oxygen demand, but the scale and kind of timing of that change is not something that we're really able to capture here. So yeah, I mean, there's a scenario probably like that could be run, if I did some more like literature analyses too of, do we have an understanding of what it would take to impact SOD downstream? Is it like in 10 years, you'll see a decrease in 10%, so we are not allowing for that change to occur in the model of these scenarios. However, I do believe we cut the SOD in the vicinity of the dam removal of Fullersburg, because we know that there's going to be like sediment excavation and kind of reworking of the bottom,
shrinking of the channel
stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, and just to remind everyone, the SOD inputs that we used was SOD data that we had gathered back historically for the original qual model. And Hillary, I mean, you've experienced nationwide, but that SOD data is not always available. It was a big effort at the time for the DRSCW to collect it. Yeah,
I know the guy who is like the only guy I know that does that sampling right now. And he's very hard to get a hold of because he's like the one guy in the US who knows how to do it.
Interesting. Yeah, we had to do a lot of prep work and build our own chambers and everything in order to get it. So,
yeah.
All right. Any other questions? I mean, one of the things is we will be making these slides available to everyone, so you can peruse them at your leisure with your favorite bottle of wine. Hillary was pointing out it does, when you look at the model and pay attention to, is this a mean value or a total or a max value, that kind of thing, things will begin to put you. So invite everyone to, pore over them and ask questions after they've had more time to study them and point out things that perhaps seem incongruent or perhaps point out things that, potential scenarios. The projects committee will be looking at out of season phosphorus removal. What would that look like? And also things like the area upstream of Fullersburg, for example, not the immediate upstream impoundment area, but further up as we move up towards Elmhurst. There's still relatively low DO there, that it was completely impervious to any of the phosphorus removal. And so perhaps areas like that are open to shading, which is something we may want to look at. And we're also doing some, we're also looking at potential ways to break this up more cost effectively amongst our treatment facilities. So it would be a lower cost overall. Other question came in and it's, when do you plan to use winter data, as this period is the biggest TP woes? And I assume what we're looking at there is that sometimes I assume that that's for treatment for phosphorus is more difficult during winter months. So Lucille, I'm not sure that I'll read our question. Yes. Okay. So that's what you're referring to, is that, treatment options can be more difficult for phosphorus during the month. So I think I'll maybe take the stab at that. Yes, that is probably one of the next scenarios we're going to look at, is that as we're looking at warm weather here and our target was set for warm weather, what would an annually what would it look like? What would be our target level for the winter? We are previewing it's going to be higher than the 0.28 or the 0.35 rather as the threshold, and then treating to 80% of that. We'd be looking at initially at something different to try to alleviate the exactly the issue that you're referring to. So yeah, we are aware of that, and we're trying to tweak the model to try to take into account both the environmental impact here and the ability to safely treat to that level without exceeding it. That's the way to put it. Okay, so I hope, okay, you're welcome. If there are no other questions, I am going to wrap this up, because we do have another presentation that really fly through the agenda, but really felt it was important that everybody gets the context, the questions we were answering, and how we went about answering all this. And Hilary, I really enjoyed that presentation. It was very, very comprehensive, and showed the outputs for everyone. I think people are going to want to look at their own discharge waterway and in more detail in the slides when they get them.
Absolutely. And as questions come up, as people explore, I'm an open book.
Yeah, no doubt. But thank you for taking the time today to present. That was really from the the whole of DRSCW. Thanks very much for your time. We appreciate it.
You're welcome.
And you're welcome to stay for the rest of the meeting, or you can go and see the little one who. All right. So we have a second presentation, and it is going to be our own Dina Duhalek, and she is going to be taking us through the recently published or out for comment rather Illinois Integrated Water Quality Report and Section 303D list. It had some interesting outputs for our area. So Dina, hand over to you.
Great. So we're looking at my screen, correct?
Correct, we are.
Okay, great. So as Stephen mentioned, the Integrated Water Quality Report and Section 303D list was released in draft by the IEPA in February. It is a report that covers 2 reporting cycles, 2020 and 2022. Usually it's released every 2 years, but I'm assuming because of COVID, there was a delay with the 2020 report, so they did a combined 2022 report. The public comment period has closed, and we did submit comments, and I'll talk a little bit about those as we go through this. And then as I go through my report, but the final has not been released. I'm sure they're still going through those comments, and I'll let you guys know as soon as the report is released. And then I have the link there. So the report is kind of complex, and I know that a lot of grant applications and things like that sort of ask you to use this report to report on your local discharge waters or the waters in your area. And so I want to give you a little bit of highlights about how to use the report, and then I'll go into the findings from this last report. So you're looking at the cover, and the cover has, then there's a main section of the actual report. And that's a basic summary of the statewide and some of the methodologies and things like that. But I actually find that most of the uses, most of the important information of the report are actually in the appendices. So before I go into each of the appendices, we should note that that why this is the 2020-2022 report, the data that was used in this report was from 2015 to 2019, which included our basin assessment. So in 2018, the state did their basin assessment of the Des Plaines Basin, which includes all of our watersheds. And then that was what that data was used to do this report. So if we remember that this data being used would be the fish and the bugs and the habitat from this 2018 assessment. And then it's done every 5 years. So the next one, the next couple 305B reports will be the same and be based off of this data. And then they collect about water quality chemistry samples as well. And they do that annually at about 8 times a month. And then all that data from that 5-year period was used for this reporting. So you have the main section of the report, which is sort of that high level, how many waters you were assessed, what the use support is, all that stuff for the state. But then the specific stream stuff is sort of all in the appendices. And the first appendices is Appendix A. and it has several components, but this is what I would call, for you guys who've been around for a while, we have the integrated report, but prior to 2000, we had two reports, the 305B and the 303B report. Section A is what I would call the old 305B report, and it is a summary of all waters, both supporting waters, so ones that are supporting their designated uses, as well as waters that are not supporting their designated uses, as well as waters that are not assessed. So if the EPA has a segment number and is looking at this water in any sort of data, form and doing any kind of sampling, it would be in Appendix A. And then there's different lists. There's one for streams, there's ones for lakes, there's ones for Lake Michigan, and there's one for significantly publicly owned lakes, which I looked up as lakes that are bigger than 20 acres in size. And you have an example of what that report looks like on the bottom here. I won't get into details here because I sort of have a slide later on there where we sort of compare the list and how to put it all together to actually use it. So then Appendix B is the use support methodology. As you guys know, we talk about this all the time. All of our waters are general use. So they're assessed for 4 main designated uses, which would be aquatic life, aesthetic quality, primary contact recreation, and then fish consumption. And this sort of walks through, this appendix includes all the details of how they use all the different types of data, whether that be bugs and fish, water chemistry, continuous monitoring stations such as the super stations or some SONs, and how they apply that data and how they work through that in order to determine whether or not a water is fully supporting or not supporting its designated use. And so there's a lot of details in here. I won't get into the nitty gritty because we don't have the time today. But one of the changes that has been made with the use support methodology is explained in this Appendix B4. And that's looking at total nitrogen, sedimentation, siltation, and other non-standard based pollutants. So for what they're looking at is that in the past, for some of these non-standards based pollutants, which would be things like the nutrients, phosphorus, that there is not an adopted numerical water quality standard, they use some type of threshold assessment. So with total nitrogen, it was 7.8 milligrams per liter. So when they were looking at our data, if we had bug and fish impairments, as well as water chemistry data that showed total nitrogen above 7.8 milligrams per liter, it could have listed total nitrogen as a cause of impairment on that 303B list or that 305B report. And what they've decided is that moving forward, they are not going to be making any more of those listings using those thresholds. They're going to be focusing these causes of impairment based on the water quality, where there is a water quality standard. So this time around, they did do some removals of some of these pollutants, and I'll talk about that as we as we work through that. But that was a big change. That's something that I think was a good step for use support methodology, and was something that we've actually commented on several times in past comment letters on the old reports when those have been submitted. The Appendix C is what we call the 303D list. So this is our list of impaired waters. There are many different ways you can, they present this to us in 2 different forms. There's in priority order, in alphabetical order. I like the alphabetical order because it's easier to find things. They also include the 2-year schedule for TM development. So what in the next 2 years, where are they going? They had a great appendix this year called C4, which was which actually clearly lists by water in alphabetical order where causes and segments were removed from the old 2018 303D list. So it's really easy for you to use all these different pieces together to sort of track what's going on in our watershed. C5, C6 is a list of where they are with some of the TMDLs, and then C7 is the Illinois waters in category 4C, which means the impairment is not caused by pollutants. So that would be things mainly habitat related. And I kind of have an example on the next slide. We'll sort of talk about how this is. And then Appendix D was changes in assessment IDs between 2018 and 2022. This was mainly cleaning up some typographical errors that were in the reports where maybe the stream segment or the HUC code on some of these streams were wrong in the old list, and they have made that change moving forward. So this is sort of the key slide, and then we'll get into the summary of where we are, of how to use the report. And so if you look on, I have the same stream segment pulled up from both report, and it's a segment on the East Branch. It's GBL10. I just picked it because it sort of covered everything that I wanted to cover here. So a lot of times you'll be asked in a grant, what are your impairments for a waterway? And I wanted to kind of walk you through that you do need to kind of use all of the lists and all the different appendices to piece all that together. It's not as simple of just looking at the 303D list. So if you look at the 303D list for the East Branch, you will see that it is impaired it is listed as having is designated use of aquatic life and fish consumption as impaired. And the causes are arsenic, cause unknown, dieldrin, hexachlorobenz, methoxychlor, phosphorus, and then for fish consumption, it's PCBs. Now, if you look at, so that's great, but you have to also remember that there's some key things that there are key things that may be leading to impairment, but aren't listed on the 3D list because either A, they're not a pollutant, there's a habitat impairment, and or they already have developed a TMDL for it. So just because there's a TMDL doesn't mean it's no longer contributing to water quality issues. It just means that it's no longer on the 303D list. So that's where if you pick the 305B list up for that same segment, it looks a little different, but it has the same water bottle name, the same segment, the category that's generally used, and then ALU is aquatic life use. And then listed here, it has all the reasons what it's listed, why there's impairment. So it has arsenic, cause unknown, chloride, cover loss, dieldrin, hexachlorobenzene, methoxychlor, nitrogen, stream alteration, and TP. So if you compare this list to the causes over on this list, there are some things that are been added, such as chloride. It doesn't mean that chloride is not an impairment. The reason chloride is no longer showing up here is because there's a TMDL from chloride that was approved. I believe that was a 2004 TMDL. So once that TMDL is approved, it comes off this list because this is sort of the list of things they need to do a TMDL for, but it is still a cause of impairment on that stream. You'll also see that we have cover loss and stream alteration. Those are not listed on here because those would be considered for seawaters. Those would be on that appendix, but I think it's C7 that I talked about before. So you kind of have to look in several different places if you're trying to put together all the impairments. Now I have a great spreadsheet that summarizes all of this. And so if you ever have to do this, you can just email me and I can get you the spreadsheet, or I can just pull the data for your specific segment for you. But I kind of wanted to use a little bit of time just to sort of show you that the list is not just the 303D list is not a complete list of impairments. There's a lot of other things you have to piece. They have to look at all the other sections of the report you have to look at. You notice there's a nitrogen here. This nitrogen has been delisted. If you looked at that appendix C4 that I talked about earlier, where there's a delist, if you went to this segment, that does talk about the new data shows that there is no nitrogen listing. But unfortunately, there were just some clerical errors on the 305B report. This is what our comments mainly focused on, was that, you know, this is incorrectly listed here. This should be in the final version. This N should be dropped and no longer be listed as a cause of impairment and move forward. You can see here that it's fully, and so that's the aquatic life. For aesthetic quality, AQU, it's fully supporting. There's your fish consumption for the PCBs, but you can also see the primary contact use is also impaired with FC or fecal coliform. And that is no longer on the official 303D list because we had the TMDLs that were just approved in 2019 that covered that fecal coliform. So that's kind of how to use the report and all the data that's in the report. And then I'm kind of going to give you a summary of where we are and what the new report showed for us. So we have aquatic life. We have some really good news. It's very exciting. But if you look down here for the lowest section of the West Branch, which kind of starts in the McDowell area and then kind of goes to the confluence with the East Branch, it is now fully supporting its aquatic life use. Its bugs and its fish and its chemistry data have taken that water off the 303D list entirely, and it is now fully supporting its designated use. This is the first green we've had in aquatic life use for as long as I've been with working with the DRSCW, so it's really exciting to see some of that green on this map. We also had a couple of, the data had shown that a lot of other indications throughout the watersheds where we had causes removed. The stream is still impaired for other things, but there have been certain causes that have been removed for various reasons, including new data, legacy listings, things like that. And those are summarized here, such as that segment on Addison Creek was delisted for nickel. We had a sedimentation delisting. We had some DO and pH delistings on Salt Creek in the West Branch. And that was based on that summary of that 5 years of data from 2018 to 2019. Those streams are obviously still red. The aquatic life is still impaired, but there's just one or a couple less things on that 303D list moving forward. Now, wasn't all good news. We did have some new listings. So if you look at these streams that I have highlighted in yellow, have new listings, and it's mainly been focused on this cause unknown. On a lot of waters where there were some of those historical delistings or some changes, the EPA has added cause unknown as a concern. It's not a pollutant specific, it's probably a better description of what we actually know there. We might have a little, the DRSCW may have some data that we can piece out what might be in that cause unknown, but they did use that a lot this year and add some listings. One of the things that kind of stuck out that it should be highlighted is that lowest section of Salt Creek way over here. GL 19 has a new cadmium listing. I need to dig into that data and try to find out exactly what's going on. I don't know of a cadmium source there. You know, in what ways, to my knowledge, that watershed, there may be some illicit connection or something like that, but I'm gonna try to do some time to look into that data and see why that new listing is, just because it's a metal and it is just kind of unusual to have that happen. For aesthetic quality, we had a couple of new, we had a delisting on that, the section ILGL 02 in Addison Creek, which is the big the big section of Addison Creek, is now fully supporting its aesthetic quality. It used to be impaired for trash, but it looks like it's gotten some trash cleanup and it is now considered fully supporting. That sort of really only leaves one stream segment, which is the upstream part of Addison Creek, as impaired for aesthetic use. And that is still listed for bottom deposits, total phosphorus, and visible oil. And that's that upper section. These other red dots are actually lakes and or impoundments that have been listed. So this is like up in Bussey Lake, and then these are within the Arboretum on their property. They have a couple lakes that are listed. On this presentation is mainly focusing on the streams. Fish consumption had no changes from the report. We do have quite a bit of our segments impaired for various metals and PCBs mainly, but there was no change in the report since 2018. And then in 2019, we really had no changes for primary recreational contact. We have a couple segments that are fully supporting, which based on the data that I've collected is a little bit surprising over here at Addison Creek. And then the rest ones are red, and that's all based on fecal coliform collection and their analysis of that. So that kind of summarizes our watershed, but before we leave, we did also have some good news down in the lower DuPage. The lower DuPage has 3 segments of their streams that are fully supporting for aquatic life. Some are historical. The Lily Cache Creek and the Norman Drain have been fully supporting for a while, but that lowest section of the lower DuPage River, which is down from Shorewood down to the dam, which is on the main stem, is now fully supporting its aquatic life use. So its macroinvertebrates and fish populations are showing that that fully supporting there. So some good news down there as well. I did not pull in all of the slides on their aesthetic use and fish consumption and primary rec, but I do have that data if anybody is interested in that. And I don't know if anyone has any questions on this report.
I am not seeing it.
Sure, everyone is probably over us talking about data.
Yeah. So Dina, it was just occurring to me, one of the things we'll want to double check is that, and I was trying to do it there, but that we were picking that cadmium up in our MS4 support sampling. That is a new parameter coming on. I don't think it was on the.
It's on our, we sample it for metals. We have that.
Yeah,
data.
I figured we did. I was just double
but
checking.
it's part of our metals panel, so we have sediment data as well as water.
Yeah, I knew it was in the sediment, and then I was trying to check it was in the water column chemistry. I figured it was. Just double check that our. Just reminder to us that we make sure that that suite of parameters matches the. And I'm talking about is that the MS4 permit for the sampling here supports our municipal and county partners in meeting their MS4 requirements, and we pass all that information over to DuPage County, for example. And if they have a suite of parameters they want you to test for, but they also have anything that is on the 303D list, also goes onto that list. So we just want to make sure that we're not they haven't come up with something on that list that was not in our parameter list. Right. I have a couple of just quick notes on our, I realize we're sort of getting onto the hour and I don't want to get between people and lunch. But quick updates on our major projects. All of our permits, our partners or who have their permits are expired. I believe just about everybody either has their final permit or it's on public notice. And as you know, we successfully negotiated that extension with our EAG and IEPA partners. On our physical projects, oh yes, the annual report, which was due at the end of March, was submitted. Thanks to staff and everyone who contributed to getting that report together. Moving on to physical projects, we're currently working with DuPage County Stormwater on putting together a memorandum of understanding for placement of the ladder at Faywell Dam. We're not going to be making the purchase of the ladder at this point is designed. We have a concept design that also needs to be reviewed by DuPage County, hopefully getting it to them this week. There's been a couple of updates in it. Until those two things are approved, we will not be making that purchase. Okay, in Grow Mill, once again, we're working through permitting on that project, and once again, working with various partners to make sure we get those permits in a timely way.
Stephen, we have a motion on that.
We do have a motion on that. Yeah, do you want to float that?
You can go ahead.
All right, so we are, it's come to our attention that we need effort into our permitting process. That's preparation of models and looking at indirect impacts on wetlands. And so staff have requested of the projects committee to be allowed to put $10,000 out of our contingency fund, which is currently about $145,000, but move $10,000 out of there into the line for the Fullersburg Woods dam project. Projects committee has consented to this, and as we had a general membership meeting, we're bringing it to general membership to take a vote to allow us to move that $10,000 from contingency fund into the Fullersburg Woods dam removal budget line.
Okay, you heard the motion, and it is available funding. It's just moving of one place to
Yes,
another.
and yeah, the contingency is there for exactly this kind of.
Yeah, good forethought to have that fund. I see a bunch of hands here, and I'll take Sue Barrett as the motioner and Dennis Stryker as the second. If we can put that up for a vote.
Okay, the motion has passed unanimously.
Okay, thank you very much. Moving on along then, our East Branch project is, Dina and I did do a site visit with Army Corps of Engineers out there and walked the site, and they are considering also working with us on that particular location. More news on that later if that comes to fruition. However, we're proceeding as planned with development of that project with our partners in Will County. So the next item is moving to Springbrook. I seem to put my pages out of order. Sorry, I'll be going back one to Springbrook Phase 2. We have a motion to approve. This is a contract amount was budget for $11,000 to sign a contract with MBI for post-project sampling at the site. As you know, we're working with the Forest Preserve on that. We're monitoring the site, obviously for our own permit, but also for their permit. And we're doing QHEI, MIBI, and FIBI at 5 locations at the site. And this $11,000 is to cover that. Budgeted and previewed. We're just looking, signal that everyone is okay with us moving forward with signing that contract to that amount. So the motion is to approve a signing of a contract with MBI of up to $11,000 for the post-project monitoring at Springbrook Phase 2.
All right, I see a hand raised by Larry Cox to motion that and Jennifer Hammer to second.
The motion has passed unanimously.
Thanks.
Thank you.
So I am not going to go through a lot of the other items unless someone has a specific question. Just a couple of things I want to draw attention to. Board member Dennis Stryker has donated $5,000. We donated it to the Conservation Foundation with the stipulation that it was to go to the DRSCW for use on their activities. And it has been, if you look back into our budget, you'll see it was placed in there, and it will be going into the support of the physical projects. The two other things is tomorrow, Dina is going to be presenting at the Emerging Contaminants in the Environment Conference, which is an online conference. It's an excellent conference, and this is a submittal that we made in conjunction with MBI, with Ed Rankin. So this is coming out of our IPS tool, and we're going to look at derivation of chloride thresholds in wadable streams. Dina and Dave, was there anything else in the agenda you think I should go to, or?
No, we do put a lot of effort to put information in the agenda, so hopefully everyone is just reading that before the meetings. The presentations today, as all the others too, are on our website under presentations. So if you want to forward that to other staff or your consultants, please do so. Our next meeting coming up will be June 29th. And we anticipate remaining in this virtual format for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, if anyone has questions on the agenda, something they were hoping I was talking about and I didn't, just reach out to either Dina or myself. Okay,
with that, take a motion to adjourn. Motion by Steve Zahner, a second by Dennis Stryker. So we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time.
Do you want to kill the recording, Dina?
Thank you. Yeah, hold on a second.